Welcome to Perspectives in Adventist Education. I'm your host, Stephen Brawley, Director of Secondary Education and Accreditation at the North American Division. Adventist education started in the late 1800s and has grown to operate programs from early childhood, elementary, secondary, and university levels, becoming the largest Protestant private school system in the world. Our graduates have become prominent thought leaders in all fields. Yet, few outside of the system know who we are and what we do. This series will seek out current voices to share how we are facing educational questions with an Adventist perspective. Today, Debbie Michel, Director of Communication for the Lake Union Conference and editor of the Lake Union Herald, speaks with Mario Ferguson on supporting spiritual development.
All right, so Mario Ferguson, principal, Andrews Academy. So for those who don't know, tell us a little bit about you and your role there at the Academy.
Well, first of all, I'm glad to be here with you, Ms. Michelle. I am a pastor, principal, Bible teacher, automotive teacher. I spent a lot of my years in the technical high school system in the state of Connecticut. And in 2011, I transitioned to seminary. And while I was in seminary, you kind of said I was done with teaching, but the Lord had a sense of humor. And there was a position that opened up for a contract teacher, and I ended up teaching some technical education classes and some Bible classes at Andrews Academy. And it's been 10 years, went to my 11th year at the Academy. So currently, I now serve as the principal.
As principal, and you've been serving as principal?
Going into my fourth year.
Fourth year?
Yeah.
Started?
2020, 2 weeks before school started, I became principal.
During the pandemic?
During the pandemic.
Okay.
But God is able.
Amen. Amen. He is. And so, seminary, and you were doing Bible, and so you've come to see the value of putting them together. There you are at the Academy teaching. So talk to us about the importance of spiritual development for our kids. Because yes, we send our kids, and in full disclosure, my child was a student there at Andrews Academy, and so I was able to get a glimpse into what it is that goes on, and I see that there is that emphasis every semester at Bible class, in addition to your basic reading, writing, arithmetic. Why is this so important for us to stress the spiritual part of it?
Well, ironically, our theme for this year is Eternity Starts Here.
I love it.
And the reason why we selected that theme is because eternity does begin not only at the Academy, it begins in our hearts, but it's really important for us to capture the hearts of the kids. A lot of schools, the first thing they do, they try to capture the head. But if you capture the heart, and everything else will fall in place. Yeah. Now, it's really important for us to create an environment that is conducive to spiritual growth. And how that happens is a lot of times kids, they want to have an opportunity to serve. And if you can present opportunities for them to serve in different capacity, not every child is going to be able to sing. But we have I've provided opportunities for service. So we have had what we call community service church, where we have service in the morning, and we would select a group of individuals. So like last year, we selected police officers and first responders and teachers and medical personnel. And what we did is we celebrated them for what they did during COVID, but also what they do on a daily basis. And we served them, we brought them in, we had plaques for them, and we also had lunch provided for them. And then in the afternoon, we went to the nursing home. And we sat with elderly people who don't get a lot of visitors, right? So that's kind of one opportunity that we provide. The kids are not only hearing the theological, but they're actually putting it into practice, because Christianity is very practical, right? It's not a theoretical belief, we read the Bible, but the Bible, Christianity is very practical. Like Jesus sets the example for us. Like, he just didn't say, you are my disciples. He says, like, you're my disciples, I'm going to walk with you. I'm going to train you, right? And then when I leave, I expect for you to carry on what I have taught you. So at Andrews Academy, we try to provide opportunities. So in the last 2.5 years, I haven't had to plan music for chapels because I find students who are interested in that, and I say, hey, get a schedule together, get some kids, make sure that you guys practice, and that's a ministry. During COVID, we had to get cameras because we were not able to sit in the classrooms, and we had to stream our worship service into the classrooms. So we bought cameras, and we could have mounted those cameras on the wall, but we chose not to because we have kids who actually operate those cameras, and it's a ministry, right? So we have kids who do audio visual. That's also part of ministry that have to do with our worship service. So giving the students opportunities to serve, right, actually helps them to develop their spiritual growth. What can I contribute to God? What can I bring to the school? What can I bring to my community? Right? It's giving them opportunities to serve. So we have provided more opportunities. We have more service days now. And when we get back, we're actually working on having like a service wall where we can have opportunities where if something is happening at the Lake Union and say we need help on this particular day, the kids can go and say, oh, there's something happening here. I'm going to be a good neighbor. I'm going to go ahead and help. So providing opportunities for them to serve is really important in developing.
Yeah, I love that in terms of putting the emphasis on service, which makes their Christianity practical. They are doing Bible classes, but it's not just the head knowledge, but here's a way in which they can put it into action. And by putting it into action, one of the things too is that they see they have value, because quite often as someone who serves in youth ministry, and I don't want us to be going off too much on a tangent, whereby young folks will say, well, the church doesn't need me, but here it is at the school, they feel, you know what, I'm needed.
Yep. I think that our responsibility is to train and then empower. And then you don't have to be upfront as an adult. If those kids have been trained, you could step back and you could watch them. And if they do something that was a little off, you don't have to chastise them. Because what you do, you debrief and say, hey, what could we have done better? And they themselves will sometimes correct themselves. They'll say, yeah, I should have done this. You don't have to say anything, right? So and Jesus sets that example, because what he did was he trained those disciples for 3 years. That's what he did. And then when he was leaving, he said, hey, listen, this is what I've taught you. Now I want for you to go ahead and put it in practice. But even before he left, he was saying, hey, I need for you to do this. I need for you to go there, right? And then when he left, he says, you have walked me for these many years. You have watched me. Now it's time for you to go ahead and do what I have taught you to do. And I think that our schools should have that philosophy where, hey, I'm going to train, I'm going to empower, and I'm going to allow you to do what you need to do. I mean, if we look at our history as a Seventh-day Adventist church, we'll discover that the church was not started by old people. It was young people. It was the Advent movement. It was young people.
Yep.
And they're the ones who started this thing, right? And we kind of see the reverse now, where you have more people who are elderly who are at the helm, and young people are standing behind saying, okay, man, I wish that I could really do something. I wish they see my value, and because I have a lot of ideas, but they're never given the opportunity to serve. So I try to give kids the opportunity to serve. And ironically, it's ironic that I'm on a podcast, because we developed a studio last year, and that studio was developed with the idea in mind that we're going to give the kids the opportunity to create ministries, right? Because it has to be relevant to them. The Bible has to be relevant. Otherwise, they disconnect. So if it's not relevant, they say, hey, I don't need to hear this. It's not relevant to my experience. So the opportunities that we have given is really to make Jesus relevant and real to our students, right? So that they don't say, well, I'm studying this stuff, but I don't even know what I'm studying it for because it has no relevance to my life. And one of the ways that we can actually make Christ real is through service, because that's the best example that Jesus sets for us.
Can you give me any examples of maybe something that a student who might have been, struggling with their spirituality and what you've been talking about, how it has been made practical and real? Any examples that you can give us of what you're describing?
Yeah, I could give you several examples, but probably one of the most simple experiences is we had a student who went through the lunch line, and he was struggling with money, so he was taking stuff, right? And I it was reported to me, and I observed and I saw the student do it.
Wow.
Now, there were some consequences, but it was redemptive in the sense that, hey, I know what you've done, and we know that we have to give some consequences. But what are some things that I can do to help you on your journey? And when that student came to the academy, the student wasn't baptized. Have a lot of issues with the father not being in the home. The last time he saw his dad when he was very young.
Wow.
And the mom's a single mom. They're trying to make ends meet. And last August, I was able to baptize the student.
Wow.
Right? I baptized the student. He came. He says, I want to help my mom. She's working hard. So I found him a job, and he's been working. Right? So, a lot of times we define our students based on their mistakes. But God doesn't define us by our mistakes, right? He always sees our potential. And I think that is important for us to always see the potential in our students. Like what they are right now is not necessarily what they're going to be tomorrow, right? But if I said, hey, you stole something, and I'm going to use that as a way to define who you are, that would have never given me the opportunity to then connect with that student to the point where they say they want to be baptized, and I want you to baptize me, right? So giving kids opportunities to really experience Christ in a really relevant way also has to do with us being a reflection of who he is. Like, what would Jesus really do? Would Jesus just say, hey, this is what you have done, this is your consequence, that's it? No, having some type of redemptive discipline or having a relationship with that child or any student really shows who Christ is, because he's a relational God, right? And so when we leave him outside of the equation and we say, hey, I'm going to punish you, first of all, God is not in the business of punishing, right? He's in the business of loving. And so having redemptive discipline, because discipline is positive. Discipline says, hey, I want to see you make a turn for the better. And so in my leadership, that's something that I've implemented. I've implemented discipline, not punishment, because punishment is like, hey, I'm going to get you for what you've done. But discipline is like, hey, I'm going to love you in spite of what you've done. I'm here, I'm going to love you, which is what Jesus does for us. He's like, hey, I know that you've messed up, but I'm still loving you. My arms are still wide open. So I think that giving kids that opportunity to know that they're loved and cared for, even when they're not at their best, right, is really important, because that's what Jesus does for us.
As I'm listening to you and you're talking about making those students feel loved, yes, they're there, for the reading, writing, learning, and, Bible, those other classes. But at the heart of this, if the leadership, the teachers, are not there to nurture and care and to let the students know that no matter what, yes, you may make mistakes, but we will always love you. That unconditional love that we talk about with Christ, to make that clear to them, then what use is it? What good would come of it? And so that's very encouraging to hear, what it is in the heart of your philosophy with the students there at Andrews Academy. I don't know if you had any other examples of, changes that you've seen with students, because that was a powerful one, what you've said.
Yeah.
I mean,
We have seen students who have come in that really, they come in and they say, nobody loves me, nobody cares for me, and I'm just basically going to be destructive, right? And I have had several students like that. And you take the time to listen to what they're going through. And you discover, well, they're projecting their issues, but the issues doesn't have anything to do with the school. It doesn't necessarily have anything to do with you. They just doesn't have an outlet. They don't have anybody to bounce things off of. And just by making ourselves available. So the power of presence is something that is meaningful and powerful, right? I may not always have the answer, but my presence and lending myself and listening can make a difference to someone. Sometimes, because by nature I'm a fixer. I mean, I fix cars. By nature I'm a fixer. And sometimes you want to go in and fix people's issues. And you discover, well, it's not really your right to go and fix anybody's issue, right? At the end of the day, Jesus is the one who fixes the issues. But you just have to make yourself present and available and listen. And listening is intentional. Like, hey, I could hear people passing by outside, or motorcycle passing by. I could hear it. I don't want to hear it, right? But listening is listening with all of you. Like, it's intentional. Like, I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to hear you. I'm going to give you all of me. And I'm going to not only just sit there, but I'm going to respond in an appropriate manner. And what I've done, and I think that many of our teachers at the academy, they've made themselves available. So it's not just presenting the academic content. Because to be honest with you, they can find good schools that will be able to deliver the academic content. But the relational aspect is what's really important. So over the years, there are many kids that I've had that I've developed relationships with that could come and sit in my office and speak to me. And when they speak to me and they see that I really care, what it does is says, hang on a minute, all this time I thought I couldn't find anybody who really cared for me. But here I have teachers and I have an administrator and I have somebody who takes the time, right, to listen to me and to show that they care. And love can transform, right? And I've seen it where that person who didn't feel love, all of a sudden when they feel love, they're motivated. They're thriving. They're no longer in survival mode, right? And so there are many students that we have, they come from Christian homes, but that doesn't mean that everything is perfect at home. And they come in and they're struggling. And what I've discovered is that in the Adventist community, there is kind of like a facade. So it's like you could be going through some struggles and you will basically kind of fake it. You come in, you smile, and you act like everything is okay. But inside you're dying. And not realizing that there's somebody who's going through the same struggle as you. If you would only be transparent, that person will then be able to share and say, oh, wow, you're going through the same thing too? So how can we get through this together? And students, when they come with challenges. But just making yourself available and letting them know that they're loved and they're cared for makes all the difference in the world. So I've seen many kids I've baptized kids who, they came in and suicidal. Didn't want to live. But at the end of the 4 years or however many years, they say, I feel like Jesus really loves me and there must be a reason why I'm still here. And they want to give their life to Christ. So there are many stories that I could share of God's grace and his love for students, right? And just making myself available, and my teachers make themselves available to the students. They listen, they care, So it's not just about getting a paycheck, because Lord knows it's not that big, right? But it's about being present, being available, and allowing God to use you. And to some student, you may be for a moment the God that they know, because God reflection in you is going to show like, hey, God is love, right? And before they get to know the God that you serve, they get to know you. And when they get to know you, say, wait a minute, you're this way. Why are you this way? And you can say, it's because I'm connected to the source, right? And I'm a reflection of that source. Then they want to really know who God is. Because just because the kids grew up in an Adventist home does not necessarily mean that they've had a relationship with Christ.
And, I want to talk about that because, one of the things, parents who might be listening who are thinking that my child is in an Adventist home, I have them in club ministries or whatever, I don't necessarily need to send them to an Adventist school. How would you answer that parent?
Well, what I will say is this, that your kids can go through what we call ritualistic practices. So in other words, they will go to church and they will participate in Pathfinders. They will go to church, repeat affirmation of faith, and their faith have never really been affirmed. They could go through all those motions and never really have a relationship with Christ. And what I've discovered is there are many kids who come and they live off the faith of their parents.
Live off the faith.
Yeah.
I love it.
But
the way you say it.
Yeah, they've never really truly experienced Christ for themselves. Because you can, and I can say this, until I was in my 20s, I lived off my parents' faith, right? My mother prayed for me. My dad prayed for me. I couldn't say that I had a really strong spiritual life, right? But I believe in my mom who would pray for me and my dad who would pray for me, and I live off that, right? But you've got to get to the place where you have a personal relationship with Christ. Like the student has to get to that place. Now, how does a student get to that place where they have a real relationship with Christ?
Yep.
Well, sometimes, we try to keep our kids from having some struggles in life. So there's certain privileges that they have. And I've discovered sometimes that privilege can impede purpose, right? So sometimes when the kid is actually facing some struggles, it's when they get to learn how to pray. All this time, they've never really prayed. But now they're in academy and it's like, I'm really struggling with this thing and I don't really know what to do. But my mom used to pray, so maybe I should try praying, right? So they begin to pray. And then what happens is they begin to develop their own relationship with Christ, because even the simplest of things, they realize that God does answer the simplest of things, right? I was in a Bible class. I was teaching a Bible class one time. And there was a young man in the class. And every class I would start up say, what do we want to pray for today? Like, what request? What's your request? And he was very funny. He would always say, pray that I have a nice day. And that was his prayer every day. But one day he said, I want for you to pray for my grandmother because she's in the hospital. So I said, okay, all right, we'll pray for your grandmother. So we prayed for his grandmother, and then I checked back, every day. I would check, how's your grandmother doing? He said, well, she has cancer. So I said, do you think it's okay for me to call? So I called her. My wife and I, we went to visit her, prayed with her, anointed her, and every now and then I would go and I would call and I would check on her. Now, they moved from California so that their child could come to the academy because they didn't have academy close by. So they moved so that their grandchild could come to the academy. Grandma had lung cancer, never smoked a day in her life. Comes to the academy, and his junior year, grandma didn't make it, she died. And it was funny because we prayed for grandma, and grandma lived for a period of time. And even though the doctor had given her, the prognosis wasn't good, she was supposed to have a shorter time. But during that time, I would call her on the phone, I would talk, and she would just tell me how good God is. And she would tell her grandson how good God is, in spite of the fact that she was sick with cancer, she was still declaring that God was still good. And the young man, I'm not sure what he's doing now, but we had such a community, like he was surrounded by community people, like our school is a community. And when that happened, he was embraced, he was loved, he was cared for. And I think that young man will always remember the fact that we showed him love, because that's what Jesus is, right? But I think sometimes we shelter our kids so much that we prevent them from having some challenges. And we know that when we have challenges, sometimes that's when we learn to kind of lean on Jesus, right? But if we never have struggles, if you never had any money issues, you probably never pray about your finances, right? If you never had issues in your relationship within your family, you probably would never pray and ask God to mend fractured relationships, right? So I think that one of the ways that parents can actually allow their kids to grow spiritually is to allow them to have some real experience, in the sense that you've got to trust God enough with your child to know that if you've prayed for the child, that God is going to take care of them. And that's tough sometimes, right? Because you want to keep your little baby right here, in your arms, and you want to make sure
It's
that
a
they're
natural
okay. Yeah.
instinct to protect.
But if you have prayed and you ask God to take care of them, you've got to trust that. And even when they make bad decisions, you still got to keep praying for them. You got to make yourself available, and you got to love them. But you've got to say, okay, that person, that child, needs to develop their own relationship with Christ. Another issue that parents have is that when their kids begin to question whether or not God exists. And that's challenging because you've raised that child 13, 14 years old, right? And how could they get to that point where they don't believe that God exists? But this is the time when you want to have conversations with your child. You don't want for them to be in a place where they hide it from you and then they leave. They go out, they're 21 years old, and they've had this all the time. They never mentioned it, never spoke about it. And now they're out there. But now they're at an academy level, and you have Bible teachers or you have teachers in their lives that they want to have a conversation with. Don't be afraid to have those conversations, right? Because they may not necessarily get all the answers they're looking for, but the fact that they're having a conversation also gives you the opportunity to present Christ. And Christ is real and relevant, and he will reveal himself to them. But don't be afraid if they're asking questions, right? This is the time that they're curious. They want to know. And don't say, how could you question if God exists? Have real conversations with them. How do you know that Jesus exists for yourself? Well, maybe share some experience with them. This is why I know God exists, right? So I think the biggest issue sometimes we have is that we believe that when our kids begin to have their own ideas and they start to ask questions, that's an indictment on us and what we have trained them. And it's not, right? Because God doesn't want robots, right? He wants people who are really thinking. And you cannot be in a relationship with a robot, right? You want to be in a relationship with someone who's real, with somebody who has feelings, with somebody who's going to care about you. So I think it's important for parents to understand that.
Right. And so one of the things, too, that I'm hearing you say is that, having your children in the school, and you talked about, in terms of that community of faith that circles around the child who might be going through, issues with, family and, heart-wrenching situations, and to be able to have teachers that they can go to, leadership peers amongst you, that you can say, hey, this is what, who will not tell you, oh, your parents are getting a divorce, you need to, do whatever. That's not necessarily along the lines of what Christ is doing. So having that community of faith is what I'm hearing you say. It's important to. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, our schools are evangelistic tools. That's the main focus. That's our main purpose, right? But also, like I said before, being real and being relevant. I want to be honest, not every person that attends the academy is necessarily always going to act Christ-like. But then again, not everybody that goes to church necessarily act Christ-like, right? But I think that based on what we focus on, being in a relationship with Christ and presenting ourselves as ambassadors for Christ, right? That there's so many opportunities that are presented that our kids have a better chance of making it in the kingdom. Whereas on the outside, if you sit into other institutions, they have a greater chance of going further away from the kingdom. When they're in our context, and I would say our Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist Christian education, a Christ-centered education will point you to what's important, right? If you go the other way, you're setting your child up. Because like I said before, eternity starts here, right? There's certain things, there's certain voices that your kids will listen to. And you could say the same thing at home. But that favorite teacher said the same thing that you said, and all of a sudden they come home, can you believe it? Like Mr. V said this today. And you're like, but I've been saying that for 6 months now, right?
That's right.
Right? So sometimes the teacher is echoing what you're saying, right? It's just that the voice is different and they receive it. Because after a while, sometimes your voice starts sounding like a scratching on the chalkboard. right? But when somebody else says it, you're saying the same message, but a different voice, right? And I think that based on the fact that our principles, our philosophies, right, a lot of times line up with the parents' philosophy, right? So what you're getting is we're deepening the impression that has been made at home, right? Because the first school was home, right? But we spend a lot of time with your kids. If you spend 6 hours with your child, sometimes we spend more time than you spend with them, right? So the fact that we believe in true education, Christ-centered education, an education that says that we want to redeem the image of God in our students, right? Give them an advantage and not a disadvantage. And I think that's important for parents to understand that yes, we'll say, oh, it's expensive, but not really. When you think about the fact that this is for an eternity, right? You cannot put a price on it, right? So you could say, you know what's expensive? It's expensive when you got to pay a lawyer to get your kid out of jail, right? It's expensive when that kid has been influenced by, you send them to the public school and they're influenced and they make bad decisions and now they're in trouble and you got to get a lawyer. That's expensive. But what we offer is priceless. It's priceless. And so I think that I would recommend as a principal, as a pastor, as a parent, because my daughter graduates soon from the university and she went all the way to Rangers Academy and she went through Village, right? And I have seen the difference between the kids who did not attend our schools and the ones who went someplace else. You see the difference.
You do.
It's Christ-centered.
It's true.
So there is no price that you can put on it. You can say it's expensive. No, what you can say is that, hey, we're doing this because we want our kids to make it into the kingdom at the end of the day. Can I put a price on that? No, I can't put a price on it.
That's priceless.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate this, and the conversation that you've had with us, because as a parent as well, those different touch points. We didn't even get into chapel and all the other, you mentioned service, and there's so many service opportunities that are there, that each step of the way there is something that the child has that's tangible, and they're hearing the messages, but that keeps pointing them upward, on that same direction. And so thank you so much for having this conversation with us and reminding us of the value of that spiritual development of our kids. Yes, the home is an important place, but then having that partner with the school to say the same things that not necessarily the kids. You've said it so many times, and your voice after a while, it does tend to, So thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
This is Stephen Brawley, your host. Thanks for listening. Join us again next time as we explore more perspectives in Adventist education.
An Adventist Learning Community Podcast.